There are lots of ways to make dados for projects such as bookshelves or cases, but not many are this simple and use such simple jigs to get the job done. To do this, all you need are 2 jigs with parallel edges long enough to span the width of the piece that you're going to be dadoing, and a cleat underneath that's set at 90 degrees to the edges. Next, you need to select a bit that is sized for the type of dadoing that you're going to be doing. There are 2 dimensions that you have to look at. The cutting diameter between the carbides here tells you how wide of a dado that you're going to make. Now this one is a 3/4 inch wide, and it would work if you were dadoing for 3/4 inch wide MDF like this. But if I'm working with the kind of plywood I've got here that's slightly thinner than 3/4 of an inch, it would leave a loose joint. This bit is narrower, but the problem is it may be too long for the type of dado that you're making. The third bit is a compromise between the two. It's got a 1/2 inch cutting diameter, but the cutting height is only about 1/4 of an inch, meaning that when the bearing is riding against the edge of the jig here, it'll be cutting 1/4 inch deep. When measuring your work to use this system, it's important to measure for one edge of the dado. It could be the top edge if this were the top of the shelf, or the bottom edge from underneath here. Now I'm going to measure at 12 inches from the end and assume that this is going to be the top edge of my dado here. So, just as a precaution to avoid confusion later, put an X here where you expect the dado to be. Now it's time to clamp our jigs in position. I'm going to take the first one, lay it on top of the workpiece, push it until the cleat connects with the edge of the workpiece, and then slide it over to my pencil mark here. Then I take a clamp, and keeping this edge clear for my router to travel, I clamp both the jig and the workpiece to my workbench. Then I take the other jig, put it into position, slide it up against the workpiece edge. But this time, I'm going to take a finished sanded piece of wood that's the same thickness as the dado I want to make. And then I'm going to slide this jig firmly up against that and clamp it in position the way I did the other one. Then all I have to do is lift the shelf piece free, and I have a path for my router bit to travel. Now that I have the jigs clamped into position, I'm ready to begin routing. I've chucked the bit that we selected earlier into a 1/4 inch chuck on my router, and I've got it set to cut the 1/4 inch deep dados that I want. But if you look at this closely, you'll see that this bit seems to be extending much farther than a 1/4 inch above the base. That's because you have to allow for the thickness of the jig when you're calculating the cut depth of your dado. I'll show you how this works by placing the bit between the jigs at the end here. You can see how the bearing rides against one or the other of the jig surfaces on the edge. Now, because the bit is narrower than the width of the dado that you're going to be cutting, you're going to be sliding this against first one and then the other surface. But you have to keep constant tension against the edge of the jig, not allow it to go back and forth like this. Now all you need to do is remove your clamps, slide your jigs aside. Now I'm ready to try a test fit with the shelf piece that I used to determine the dado width in the first place. And with a little bit of a thump here, I should have a perfectly snug fit that'll give you a nice tight glue joint here. A good sign that you have a tight-fitting dado joint is that you've got very little lateral movement this way. And you managed to make this joint with just 2 scrapwood jigs and an inexpensive router bit. A variation on this joint is using a stop dado where you conceal the dado joint from the end. I've measured my workpiece and clamped my first jig in place the same as we did before, but this time I'm working with a shelf with a notch on the end so that the dado won't show through from the front. Place my shelf against my jig here with the back edge against the back of the upright piece here. And I mark the location of the notch. That's where my cut is going to stop instead of going all the way through. Then I can bring my shelf in again, put it up against this jig, slide the other jig over, and clamp it in place again. Now we need a way to stop our router before it goes all the way through the dado. And to do that, we're going to attach a block of wood to one of our jigs using a strip of double-faced tape. To set your stop block, place your router in the groove so that the edge of the bit is just touching the line you made, indicating where you want the cut to stop. Now, one thing to remember is that sometimes your router is going to have a different distance from the bit to the edge at different places around the perimeter. So when you set it up, remember where you want the edge of the router base to contact the stop block. With the router in position, all we need to do is peel the tape off of the back of our strip here. Press it down firmly against the jig to hold it in position. And get ready to route. Again, I just slide my jigs aside. I can leave this in position for future dados. And that's it. I have a stop dado, but I have a stop dado with rounded corners. That's an easy problem to fix using just a chisel and a mallet. Now I'm ready to test fit my stop dado shelf. And as you can see, I have a clean line on this edge and on this edge here, but I have the strength of a dado. And that's another way to use these simple jigs and an inexpensive bit to make a sturdy dado joint.